Tony Tonkin here from the Child Protection Party. Glad that you could be with me on this occasion to talk about another issue which has come to mind over the week, which is of some concern to me. And I'd really be interested in your feedback in relation to this particular issue concerning the family court. And the reason why I've raised this on this occasion is that it often we're often told of situations within the family court that are unjust, and because the Child Protection Party tends to have this focus where people are talking a lot about child protection in general, child protection system, and so on, we regretfully often forget to think about the family law court and the impact that that has on families. And it's an issue which I certainly plan to address over time, and I'm hoping that we can do some of that addressing today. And the issue for me is that over the last couple of days, I've had a couple of instances that have come to mind which create extreme concern for me and for us as a political party about the way child protection or the protecting of children is dealt with in relation to the family court. And I had one instance just recently. Well, there are two instances. Now, I want to stress that none of this is about a gender bias, because both of these stories that I'm about to kind of tell you, I can't tell you everything, obviously, but the real issue is that this is not about gender, because this is kind of about the same issue but experienced by a male and a female. And I guess the underlying issue is the family court prepared or able to deal with issues concerning children? Are they established, set up? Do they have the right sort of staff? Are they able to inquire, to investigate, to do all those sorts of things? And the simple answer is no, they're not. They're not able to, they're not capable of it. And the other question that was raised to me recently was, are the psychologists and social workers who work at these services, are they able to provide the sort of professional background? Do they have the professional background required in order to do the job? And when I was asked that question, I simply said, well, I don't know, because I don't know what sort of training they have. I'm not too sure of the background that they come from, even though I have known of some, particularly social workers that work there, quite competent people, but I'm not too sure whether or not they had the background in terms of interviewing children. Do they ask the right sort of questions? How independent are they in terms of giving their decisions? So one of the cases that I came across this week was where a mother, and I've got to be careful about what I say, I don't want to give too much information, because a lot of this could apply to many of you who have experienced the family law court, but where it was there, and I've worked with this woman for quite some time. I know her, and I also know her children, and my assessment of her situation is that she's a loving, caring mother who wants the best for her children, and her children have disclosed some concerning things in relation to the father. But it appears that the father, in this instance, is everything the father says seems to be believed by the court. And I question how. I know this guy. I know the story. And certainly I appreciate that he may have some grievances around his partner. I don't have a problem with that. And particularly when, you go to the family court and it becomes an extremely adversarial type of system, and which is wrong in itself, and that needs to be changed somewhat. And often, in many cases, this is a male gender thing, but in many cases, the males have been working, they have the income, they're able to provide the finances that needs to motor this thing along. And often I've found over the years, this isn't necessarily about this case, but I've certainly found that often it's the men who, because they're generating this income, they can then keep this process going for as long as they like. And it was another issue in relation to that was raised today also, and that was that the people, like, you kind of got to wonder who has a vested interest in this process, because the system itself, that is the people within this system, want to keep this process going for as long as they can, because everybody, the magistrate, the lawyers, the children's lawyer, the psychologists and social workers that work for the family law court, they all have a vested interest in this somehow. So this process needs to keep churning over so that they all can earn whatever it is that they earn. And so I believe, and this is a really quite radical thing to say, I guess, but I believe that the system does not take into account what is in the best interest of the children. And somehow this system tends to want to blame, and this is non-gender, and I stress that, they want to blame the victim. So the person that says they're a victim of domestic violence, it is that person that they wish to blame and punish. And, we've been having a conversation for years over the Me Too movement. We've been having recent conversations about women talking about harassment and abuse. But we never have the conversation talking about how people within this particular system, within the legal system, abuse and denigrate family members, and particularly the person who is victimised by this system. And ultimately, the children are victimised by this system. And in both of these cases that I've come across this week, it is clear that the family court does not have an interest in what is the best outcome for the kids. And it appears to me that they want to believe the perpetrator of the violence. And in fact, they took one of these examples to the point whereby they even threatened that the Department of Child Protection may get involved through the Crown if they didn't meet certain conditions. And in one of these cases, a woman has lost access to her 3 children as a result of this appalling system. And there is no recourse. I personally can't even imagine what it must be like well, actually, that's not true. I do know what it's like to lose a couple of kids. I lost a couple of kids also many years ago because my ex-wife took them interstate, and I was told by a solicitor at the time that there was no way in the world I could fight for them. There was no point in spending the money required to do that. And as a result, I had to let these kids go, and I didn't see them for many, many years. So actually, I do know what the trauma that has, but I do feel for this woman in particular, because I know that somehow the father in this case has manipulated the system to a point whereby those that are making the decisions have chosen to agree with his perspective and his point of view. I've been abused by this man. I know he's not a very nice guy, but I also know that somehow those people with narcissistic and psychopathic tendencies tend to be able to manipulate, cajole, to influence the people that need to make decisions about the stuff that's about their kids. And they somehow come out appearing to be the better parent. And the other issue I think that we need to be mindful of is that when you have an articulate person, male or female, it doesn't matter, but when you have an articulate person who challenges the system, who is definitely there to protect the children, who works at every possible level to make sure that those children are safe, and continually raises issues concerning those children, then that person then becomes the enemy of the state. It's like you can't challenge the system, because at the end of the day you're somehow going to be punished, and it's wrong at every possible level, because we have the right to be able to complain against the system, which is clearly in many cases simply not doing its job. We have the right to complain when we find that our children are not being cared for and nurtured and are safe with someone that we deem is unsafe. We have the Department of Child Protection that advocates that stuff, that it's always acting in the best interest of the child. But what we find with the family court is that it doesn't. And I don't mean that it doesn't do that all the time. That's not a 100% statement. But a lot of the time, and in particular these two cases I've had this week, it doesn't. And one of the other cases I find quite interesting is that this is about a male who is 6'3", burly sort of a bloke, and he's found himself from the very beginning. It's a relationship that's been off and on, but at the beginning of the relationship, the woman became pregnant, had a child, whatever. And as a result of that, the matter has wound up in the family court because she wants access to the child. Now, this woman is doing a whole range of activities that are really unhelpful and are putting the child at risk. And I mean that you have a look at what's been happening and and she's violent. Now, she's been abusing him for quite some time, but because of his size and because of the type of work that he does, it is automatically assumed that he is incapable of being the victim of domestic violence. Now, for all you guys out there that have been complaining about me talking about domestic violence and women over the last couple of weeks, I just want you to hear what I have to say. This is a man who distinctly is being assaulted by his ex-partner. And because there are drugs involved and a whole lot of other stuff, but he's perceived as not being capable of being a victim, because at the end of the day, he's tall, he's a strong-looking bloke, and he doesn't look like... I don't even know what that looks like. Like, how do you make a judgment as to whether someone's is suitable enough to be the victim of violence? You shouldn't, but they do. And as a result of that, his particular case has left the child with the abusive mother. Now, it is these incredible constructs that people within the family court are making about people. It is like it is the most judgmental system you can imagine that will tend to want to favour the person who is the perpetrator of violence, of controlling and manipulative behaviour, and that somehow they've got a blind spot to what that behaviour is and how it impacts and how eventually it's going to impact the children. And in one of these cases, we've got children who are saying, this is all the stuff that's happened to me, and no one's listening to them. And I think at some point, kids, no matter what, and this has happened with me in my own case, at some point the kids grow up and they understand what the other parent's been doing. And if they're doing the parental alienation stuff, if one family decides doing the parental alienation stuff, I can assure you that when these kids are old enough, they're going to turn around and they're going to say, I don't think the way that you, that is the parent they lived with, treated me appropriately. And that I should have got to have known the other parent much better than I had, and all the stuff that you said about them is untrue, because my experience is that they're not that person you identified them as. And kids, when they get older and become adults, they make these decisions for themselves. And there will come a time when these kids, as sad as it is that they will be removed from their parent, this is both cases maybe, that they will be removed from the care and love of a compassionate, caring parent and placed with an abusive person means that they will recognise the abuse. And I would like to see a system whereby there can be some form of accountability and retribution to those kids that have been placed by the family court with parents who have continued to abuse them. And it is of particular concern that the family court knows of these concerns, yet hasn't got the courage, for whatever reason, to assess the situation appropriately so that the kids' version, some of these kids are old enough to talk about what it's like for them, and but they don't. And one of these cases that I know of where some stuff was said to the counsellor or whoever it was that did the interview for the family court. One of the children highlighted some stuff that had been happening that they've been unhappy with, which didn't even find its way into the report. And I think that if you're doing an evaluation of the well-being of a child and you miss out on something that they have said, which is fundamentally important for the judge to hear, and you don't put that in, then you should not be doing what it is that you're doing. In fact, I would advocate that if they're a social worker or a psychologist, you take them to the complaints authority within that professional body and you complain, so that they will, from that point, because it's just, whichever way you look at it, it's just terrible practice, and it's also abusing the children. And so we have, on one hand, a perpetrator of violence and the kids are with them. On the other hand, we have a system of magistrates, lawyers, psychologists, social workers who allow that abuse to continue. And I've often wondered, as I said earlier, I wonder why they would do that, because it was quite evident from one of these cases. I know it's quite evident from both of them, and many that I've known in the past, whereby my assessment would be, that this person's a dangerous person. It is best for the child to have minimum contact with this child, the child to have minimum contact with the parent. And it doesn't take much of an understanding of domestic violence, of human behaviour, in order to be able to make those sorts of assessments of people. And I know that I often think, well, am I doing that from an unbiased perspective? Because when I heard this case the other day with this man, I was aware of my biases around, the way I view women and domestic violence and how there's important. So I had to check out with him, particularly some of what he thought were some of his behaviours that were unhelpful, and there were very few, if any. So, and I've got to take it on strength values. And I had someone else that could support those notions around him as well, fortunately. So I was able to understand exactly what was happening for him. And I'm not there to draw right and wrong. I'm actually there to ensure that the kids are protected. But I do wonder whether the family court is kind of doing the same. Now, if you'd like to offer some feedback, Simi, how do we make the system has never been for the children? How do we make that judgment? Relatively easy. Look, I know that there are many cases where the system has worked, and I'm not saying that under every circumstance the system doesn't work. I'm simply saying that there are times when it fails the kids, and we need to ensure that our system is as perfect as it can be. And those people that are failing the children need to address those issues, and wherever that might appear. And there needs to be some sort of oversight. So I don't know whether the family law court has someone that does an audit, that looks at cases, re-interviews people, finds out what's been happening, looks at the reports that are done and finds out whether they're accurate or not. I doubt whether there's anybody that does any of that. But the Child Protection Party is interested in making those changes. We want to ensure that every child, no matter where they are, no matter where they come from, no matter what their background is, we want to make sure that they have the best possible outcome that they have. And if a child is then subsequently placed in a place which is going to be harmful to them, then clearly that's not where we want that kid to be. So thanks for listening to this conversation, one way as it is. Angela Mills says ICL needs to be compelled to at least meet the kids. I've known of cases where they never met the kids, and I know of cases within the youth court or children's courts where they haven't either, yet they're there to make an assessment on these children. And I love the notion that the other thing that came to mind is that when we go to family conferences, which are held in South Australia, they're held by the youth court, but they're not a court process, and the children's representative often hasn't even met the children, but sits there and speaks of them as if they have, so doesn't know their perspective or whatever, and there's definitely a flaw within that system. So what I want you to do is to comment if you've got any issues in any stories that you think need to be told. We at the Child Protection Party at the moment are eager to hear those stories so that we can video them where possible, audio them if that's the best way to go, but to hear what you have to say. We're the conduit for you, so we need to be able to hear what you're saying so that that voice can be heard elsewhere. Because without your voice and without your support of CPP, none of this stuff is ever going to change. But we need it to change for the sake of our kids. So join with us, become a part of the Child Protection Party, and make a difference, because someone at some point needs to make that change. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being with me. Take care. Look after yourself. Add as many comments as you can. I'll follow them up later, and just make sure that you're safe.